Welcome aboard the Strange Express. My name is Dr. Scherzo Stantio. I met David while browsing at an antique shop. I'd come upon an item that I couldn't determine what it was or what it might have been used for in one of the glass cases. I'd called the owner over, but he didn't know what it was either. He explained that he was selling it on a commission with several other items, so he's not thoroughly familiar with all of them. David, who happened to be standing nearby, advised me that the item in question was a 19th century wooden thread winder. I was curious as to how such a young man possessed such esoteric knowledge. His explanation was that he had been around. I will share more with you about David, but we'll have to wait, as I believe I just heard the signal that the Strange Express is about to be on its way. So please take a seat, and I will tell you more in just a moment. David appeared to be in his 30s, and so his knowledge about a 19th century sewing implement surprised me. I pulled out my phone and I looked it up, and he is absolutely correct. While I didn't find an exact match for the one in the glass case, the photos for the ones that I did find were similar enough so that there was no doubt that the object was a thread winder. I went back over to where he was and struck up a conversation with him. At the time, I don't know if he was just timid or if he just didn't want to socialize, but he was very standoffish when I tried to strike up a conversation with him. There was something very unusual about him. Have you ever met someone that you felt like you knew them from somewhere, but you couldn't place where you met them? I got that feeling with this guy. If I'd met him before, though, I don't know how I could have ever forgotten it. He is well over 6 foot tall, dark complected, and he had the build of a weightlifter. But I was sure I'd seen him somewhere before. Maybe he just reminded me of a comic book superhero. While I want to know why he seemed familiar to me, he was not the type of person that I want to make angry either, so I left him alone and returned to perusing the antiques. I purchased a couple of small items and had started to leave when I felt a big hand on my shoulder. I heard him say, "I'm sorry, I didn't intend to be rude earlier, but I've been a loner for a long time, and I tend to avoid interaction with people." "No problem," I answered, and I started to turn to leave again, when he said, "I really only came in here to avoid being caught out in the rain." I glanced outside, and it was a very gloomy day. It was early fall, and the leading edge of a cold front was passing over, and while we hadn't received any rain yet, the dark skies outside were certainly foreboding. "Are you on foot?" I asked. "Yes," he answered. "As a matter of fact, I am." I replied, "Well, if you need a lift, and it's not too far away, I'll be happy to drive you." He said that he'd be most grateful, and we introduced ourselves and we went out to my car. He told me that his name was David. He never gave me a last name, and I didn't ask. He said he was currently working for a handyman for a widow that lived nearby, doing maintenance work around her house and sometimes serving as a cook and chauffeur. He said he had been working there for about 3 years. He had a small room over her garage, and the widow provided him with what he called a generous weekly allowance. I asked him how he knew about the thread winder. He said that he really had been around. He's not sure where he'd seen one before. He thought that it may have been the widow he worked for had one. I asked him what type of work he'd done before. He said he worked as a mechanic's assistant, a custodian, dishwasher. He had worked on a few construction crews. He had followed harvesting crews across the country. He said, "If you need references, I don't have any." He said he'd done many other odd jobs. He'd even been a courier for a telegram company at one time. I said, "Do they still deliver telegrams?" He said, "I don't know. It was over 40 years ago when I did that." 40 years ago, I laughed. "I don't even think you were born 40 years ago." I was answered with silence for a minute or so. When he finally did speak, he mumbled something that sounded like, "Yeah, I guess you're right. After that, David was silent until we pulled up to where he told me he was living. At this point, the rain was pouring down. David asked, "Do you mind if I wait a minute or two? I'm afraid that I'll get soaked if I get out there right now, and while I have no fears of melting, I would hate to tramp into Mrs. Waring's house dripping rain all over the place." I answered, "Absolutely. We can wait until it stops, or at least slows down substantially." David then looked away from me and turned his head toward the passenger side window, as though he were looking for something through the water droplets that were streaming down the window. While still looking out the window, he spoke to me, saying, "I'm going to tell you about myself. In my lifetime, I've only told this to 2 other people. One thought I was playing a joke at first, but later was convinced I was crazy. The other is poor Mrs. Waring. I'm not sure if she believes me or not. I tend to think she does, but she is far too nice to tell me that she thinks I'm insane, even if she doesn't believe me." David then began telling me about himself. It was difficult to remain quiet as he shared his story with me. I don't believe I'm credulous by nature. In fact, I tend to be suspicious, and the information he shared with me was nothing short of incredible. For the most part, though, I listened quietly to him, only interrupting here and there to get clarification. In essence, he explained that he is from another plane of existence, and that he was here on this plane of existence due to a mistake that he made. He told me that where he came from, perfection was the standard. Mistakes are not acceptable, and with good reason. And around where he came from, the future could be known by anyone who wanted to know it. He had fallen in with many of his compatriots, and they followed the charismatic leader, who had convinced them that he could change the outcome if they would but join his rebellion. He told me that since he had seen the future, he knew what lay in store for us during the next few years, and it is not good. My question was, why was he sharing this with me? David paused for a moment, and then he said, "Looks like the rain is letting up a little." Then he tilted his head and looked up in the sky and added, "Look up there. There's a rainbow. Well, that's always a good sign. Look me up again soon. You know where I live. Drop by sometime and we'll talk some more. I'm afraid that I've got to go earn my keep now. It was great meeting you, and seriously, do drop by again soon, and hopefully I can tell you by then why I'm telling you all this." With that, he extended his hand and we shook hands, and he got out of my car and dashed through the sprinkling rain to the front door of the 1960s house. I saw him pull keys out of his pocket and unlock the front door as I started to back out of the driveway. I drove home and rehashed our conversation, trying to make sense of it. I got the impression I was supposed to know and understand why he's telling me about the pending end of the world. It's not like I can do anything about it. Besides, other people have been predicting the end for so long that nobody would be able to convince someone who doesn't believe that the end is near at this point anyway. I got sick the next week, some kind of stomach virus. I planned to go back to see David that week, but it was 2 weeks before I could get back over to see him. I drove over to the house and rung the doorbell and waited. Shortly, an older lady dressed in black came to the door. "Mrs. Waring?" I asked. "Who are you?" she replied nervously. I introduced myself and told her that I'd come to talk to David. She appeared to jump as if frightened when I said this. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Waring?" She looked at me as though she were trying to size me up for a moment, and then she asked me to come inside. "Well, if David's busy, I can come back later," I said. She responded, "Please, please come inside." I went in and she asked me to take a seat, and she sat down across from me. She started off by saying, "David has left." Her voice quivered when she said it. I asked, "Where did he go?" Mrs. Waring answered, "I don't know. He didn't say. He said he's going to go for a walk, as he often did, but he never came back." She was almost in tears when she said this. "Did he take any of his belongings?" I asked. "No, he doesn't have much." But no, he didn't take anything. Then I asked, "How long has he been gone?" She answered, "It's been about 2 days now. He just told me he's going for a walk, just like he's done so many times before, but he didn't come back. It's not unusual for him to be gone 8 or 10 hours, but he's never been gone this long. I don't know what to do." I thought for a moment. I don't think they just walked away. Something may have happened to him. Have you called the police? The old lady appeared to be on the edge of breaking down, but replied, "No, I didn't. David seemed to be afraid of the police for some reason. One time he scared off someone who was vandalizing the property, and when I started to call the sheriff's office, he asked me not to do so, as he wanted to avoid any interaction with the law. He promised me that wasn't because he was wanted or anything like that, but it's just that any time he had any dealings with the law, it didn't go well. He said it wasn't due to his history, but more to his lack of history." "Okay," I answered. "We'll wait one more day. If he's not back by this time tomorrow, we will call the police, history or no history." I got one of my business cards out of my wallet, pulled my pen from my pocket, and scratched through the business number on the card, and I wrote my personal phone number on it. I handed Mrs. Waring the card and told her, "Now if David comes back, or if you hear from him, or you have any news about him, please give me a call. That number is my personal cell number, and I always have my phone near me. Also, did you check in his room to see if he may have left a note or leave any clue about where he might have went?" Mrs. Waring took my card and read it, and answered, "Yes, I checked his room, but there was no note of any kind. And as I said, it didn't appear that he took anything with him." "What could have happened to him?" she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know," I answered, "but hopefully he'll be back shortly, and he'll tell us. In the meantime, are you going to be okay?" She pulled out her wadded tissue from her pocket and daubed her eyes and said she thought she'd be okay. David was like a son to her, and she could not help but worry about him. I tried to reassure her, but it was difficult, as I had a bad feeling about the situation. I went back out to my car and drove to my office. I kept hoping my phone would ring and I'd get some good news, but it didn't happen. After work that day, I thought about going back to Mrs. Waring's house, but I was unusually tired, so I went home and had some leftovers for supper and went to bed. At around 4:30 the next morning, my phone rang. I flipped over and put my feet on the floor and reached over and took my phone from the nightstand and answered it. It was Mrs. Waring. She sounded hysterical, and I had a hard time understanding what she was saying. It sounded like she said that David had came back, but he had been severely wounded. I told her that I was on my way, and immediately I got dressed and drove over to her house. It was a cold morning, and the grass on each side of the road glimmered with frost, and while my car had been parked in the relative warmth of my garage, it seemed that it only reached a comfortable warmth level about the time that I arrived at Mrs. Waring's house. As I pulled up, I saw that her porch light was lit, and as soon as I pulled into her driveway, she came out of the house. She was frantically pointing toward the garage. She opened the garage door by the means of a remote on a keychain. I noticed that her big land boat, I believe it was a Lincoln, was parked outside the garage. There was no vehicle parked in the two-car garage. The garage was noticeably clean and organized. On the right side of the garage, the side that had the entrance to the house, there was a set of stairs that led to a second floor. Mrs. Waring came up to me and said, "He went up to his room in the loft. He's been stabbed or shot, and his clothes are all bloody." I started to call the police, but he stopped me. "I'm afraid he'll bleed to death." I went up the stairs and found David reclined on the sofa, wrapped in a bath towel and reading a book. "You don't look like you're at death's door to me," I announced loudly. David didn't even look up from his book, but replied, "I hope entering without knocking is not a regular habit of yours." I walked over to the dirty clothes hamper and opened it and saw it was full of what appeared to be blood-soaked clothing. I dropped the lid back onto the hamper. "Well, I thought you might not be able to answer, as Mrs. Waring indicated that you've been mortally wounded by either knife or gunshot." David appeared to continue reading the book. "Your apology is accepted," he said dryly. "Oh," I answered, "I just apologized. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it. Which was it, by the way? Gunshot or knife?" I heard David snicker under his breath. "Both, actually." I reached down and pulled the towel back from his chest, and it revealed a large bandage stuffed with gauze up close to his left shoulder. "So you were knifed and shot in the left shoulder?" He finally laid the book down and said, "No, I was shot in the shoulder. The knife wound is in my back, but I believe that it's mostly healed now. It stopped bleeding by the time I arrived here." I walked over to the bathroom. There was still some blood in the sink. "So you really are a superhero, or villain, right out of a comic book," I said. David looked me right in the eye and answered, "If so, I was very nearly a dead one last night. As to being a hero or a villain, I was basically defending myself against two people who were the scum of the earth." I sat down on the couch and said, "If you're up to it, tell me what happened." David flipped around and got into a sitting position. He took the towel around his waist and got up and headed for the bathroom. "Yeah, I can do that, but let me slip into something a little more uncomfortable. After all, I wasn't expecting to entertain a guest this morning. I know that Mrs. Waring said that she was going to call you, but I didn't expect that you got up before noon." He went into the bathroom and closed the door. I moved over closer to where he'd been sitting to see the book that he'd been reading. It was a book about Charlie Chaplin movies. I'd always preferred the movies of Buster Keaton and Harold Lloyd myself. "No, I rise with the chickens," I yelled out. Just another bad habit I had picked up along with entering rooms without knocking. I heard another snicker, and he yelled back, "So it's true, you were raised in the barn. Did you say that you were a chicken?" I yelled back, "No, I said that I woke up with the chickens. But if you want to think of me as a chicken, that's all right. Better a chicken than a jackass." The bathroom door popped open, and David stepped out laughing. "You don't have to yell, I'm right here." He is now dressed in a pair of overalls with a white t-shirt. I said, "It looks like you're dressed up to go to the barn now." He sat back down on the couch. "I just wanted to make you feel more at home." I said, "Very funny. Now will you tell me where you've been the last couple of days?" Poor Mrs. Waring has literally been worried sick. David's appearance changed to be definitely more serious when I said this. He answered, "Yes, I felt very bad about that. Unfortunately, my situation got out of my control briefly. I shall certainly try to make that up to her. She is one of the most genuinely nice people that I've ever met, and that's saying a great deal, as I have met many people in my time." David fell silent for a moment or two, as if in deep thought. Then he began again. "As you're aware, I often take long walks. I do this in order to clear my head and to contemplate my future actions. I've been doing this even more frequently now that I perceive we are nearing the end. I question the path that I'm currently on, as I am the very epitome of the damned if I do or damned if I don't paradigm. I've been trying for many years to do the right things. It really does not matter whether I do them or not. My end will be the same, and forever is a very, very long time. On this particular walk, though, I reached a final conclusion. I do not like evil. I will not join myself with evil. I will continue to resist evil until I've reached the time of my conversion, and I accept my fate, as I made a foolish choice a long time ago, but I fully understood the consequences even at the time I made it. After reaching this conclusion, I felt like the weight of the world had been suddenly lifted from me, and I turned around and headed home. I guess I had been so deep in thought that I hadn't noticed that the storm clouds had gathered again, and it appeared that I was in for a real cold, wet soaking. I picked up the pace and was about to break into a run when a car pulled up behind me and honked its horn. It was a dark-colored car, and its windows were tinted so darkly that I couldn't see who was in the car. I wasn't on the road, but I still moved further away from the road and stopped, thinking the car would move on. The car pulled up even with me and the window rolled down. A young woman leaned her head out the window and spoke to me. "It looks to me like you're about to get soaked. Need a ride?" I sensed something wrong about her, something evil. I told her thanks, but I'd be okay. Besides, I needed a shower. She answered, "Oh, come on, I won't bite, at least not hard." She then gave me a big wink. I told her, "Well, if you bite me at all, I'll have to file your teeth down." At this, she gave me a very nasty look, but she still insisted. "Come on, get in. You really don't want to get soaked, do you?" I thought to myself that she was right. I didn't want to be out in the cold when it rained, but if I accepted her offer, I probably would have to file her teeth down, metaphorically speaking. On the other hand, I don't believe that she posed any real threat to me. So I ran over to the other side of the car, and she popped the lock, and I got in, and as soon as I started to pull the seatbelt over me, she hit the lock button again. I also sensed that an even more evil entity was in the back seat, and I immediately undid the seatbelt. I reached to unlock the door, but the electronic switch didn't work, and the manual button had been removed. I was about to roll around and kick the window out when two arms reached out from the back seat and pressed something over my nose and mouth. I believe it was chloroform. I tried to reach back behind me to grab the person that was holding me, but they were successful in evading my grasp. After a moment, my hands and arms felt like I was flailing balloons, and I saw things as through a tunnel, and the sounds were like I were hearing them from underwater. It wasn't long before I had succumbed to unconsciousness. When I woke up, I was laying on an extremely foul-smelling cot, and both my hands and feet were tied securely with zip ties. Zip ties on my hands were secured to a big warehouse-style rack, and my feet were secured to the metal rail at the end of the cot. I looked around and I didn't see anyone around. There was graffiti on the walls, and it appeared that I was in a large abandoned warehouse. As I'm endowed with extreme upper body strength, I easily set my hands free in a short time. Once my hands were free, I quickly went to work on my feet, and soon I was walking around and exploring my surroundings. Apparently the cot that I had been tied to had been used more than once for an operating table for a gruesome experiment. It was almost completely covered by dried brown bloodstains, but there were also fresher areas of red stains. The whole place was strong with the stench of death. I walked over to a crate that was in the room and opened it. What I saw sickened me. Think of the worst thing you can imagine and multiply it by 4 times. You'll begin to understand what I saw in that crate. I was dazed for a moment, but I was brought out of my daze by a stabbing pain in my back. I turned around to see the young woman who had picked me up in the car standing there with a butcher knife in her hand. It was dripping with blood. My blood. The pain was terrible. Fortunately, the stab had not been forceful enough to penetrate so deep as to cause any life-threatening damage. "So," she said, "you're going to file my teeth down, are you? Looks like I'm the one holding the file, though." I answered her. "It's long been my philosophy that a soldier putting on his boots should not talk like one who is taking them off." She made a wild swing with the knife and then said, "I'll keep that in mind after I've finished removing your teeth. I'll make sure I'll remove your shoes, too." She was dancing around with the knife in both hands, wielding it like a sword, occasionally taking a swing at me, but she did it so clumsily that I was easily able to avoid contact. I knew I needed to take her out quickly as her partner could show up at any moment. Besides, she could get lucky with one of those wild swings. As I was thinking about this, she switched her tactic and made a thrust with the knife. I quickly stepped back, and as I had greater reach than her, even with the knife in her hand, I punched her with what I felt would be enough force that I hoped to render her unconscious if I was able to make contact. Unfortunately, she actually stepped into the punch, and between the grogginess of just recovering from the chloroform, the blinding headache it caused me, and the burning sharp pain in my back where she stabbed me, I hit her substantially harder than I intended to. She flew across the room like she'd been hit by a wrecking ball, and either her neck or the back of her head hit one of the metal shelves, and then she slumped to the floor, motionless. I knew I needed to locate her partner before her partner located me. I wanted to have the element of surprise, so I stealthily went down the corridor from which I believed she'd come from, hoping that I'd find her partner there. After I'd been walking in the direction that she'd appeared to have come from for about 2 minutes, I detected someone else was nearby. I stopped, and I stood still and listened. The light level was now getting low as it was evening. I heard a male voice from the shadows. "You don't play well with little girls, I see." I began to be able to make out the source of the voice. He was big, as big as I. I answered, "I didn't start any of this, but it must end now." The dark entity started to move toward me. "Oh, I'm going to end it for you. Just stay right where you are." The dark entity was still moving toward me. "Please do not force a confrontation with me. I did not intend to harm your friend, but she forced me to by attacking me with that knife. There are things that you don't know about. Again, I implore you, do not force a confrontation with me. Surrender yourself to the proper authorities." The dark entity stopped moving and was quiet for a moment. Then he started laughing. "Apparently, there are things that you aren't aware of either. First of all, she was not my friend. She was a helper, and I would have killed her myself shortly. I'm only ticked because you robbed me of that opportunity, because I had some real plans for her. Secondly, I live for confrontation. Don't you know that confrontation is the spice of life? Don't you know that without confrontation there's no resolution? Don't you want resolution?" He paused and laughed again. "And finally, the other thing that you obviously don't know is this." I could see him quickly reaching behind himself, and he pulled out a gun and fired it. I felt the burning pain as the bullet entered my shoulder. "Hurts, don't it? But wait, there's more. While you're climbing aboard that hurt train, think about this. You're going to be riding it for a long time. Maybe we can stretch it into weeks. I may even break my own record." I saw him pull up the gun again, and it appeared he was taking aim at my knees. So I sprang on him and struck him with force at his midsection. He was so stunned that the gun fell from his hand. He recovered quickly, though, and grabbed me in a headlock. I escaped by pressing one of the muscles on his leg in such a way that the pain he felt took all the fight out of him, and he curled up on the floor, howling in pain and rubbing his leg. "At this point, I'm going to need to truss you up with some of your zip ties. So as soon as you're able to walk, just let me know, and we can go back to the location where you have them." I went over to where he had dropped the gun and secured it as he had behind my back. The killer was still rubbing his leg, but he replied, "You can go back without me and get them. I don't know what you did to my leg, but I'm not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. Feels like you stabbed me." He continued to rub his leg. I must admit, it took me quite a long time to understand human guile. It was only when I began to understand it in humans that I grasped how certain ones of my own race had used it. I told him that he would either accompany me, or I would have to render him unconscious. "Well, render away, 'cause I ain't going with you unless you carry me." I considered the fact that I might need to knock him out anyway, as I may need to remove the bullet from my shoulder. I checked the wound, and it appeared that my body was rejecting the foreign object and was forcing it out on its own. I looked back over to the killer. "Please, rest assured that in the same way that I touched the muscle in your leg and caused you to feel that stabbing sensation, I can do the same with other muscles, up to and including your heart. Now, will you reconsider and agree to accompany me to where I can trust you up for the authorities?" The killer looked at me with hatred and said, "You're a dead man." I met his eyes and replied coldly, "You are wrong, on both accounts." He finally agreed to accompany me back to his base camp, but on the way he tried to rush me again, and I did have to render him unconscious after all, and ended up carrying him the rest of the way. I used almost all of his zip ties in securing him, as I wanted to make sure he didn't get away. It took me a while, but I had to make my way over to the strip mall where they had a payphone to call the sheriff's department, and then make my way back home while obscuring my trail in case they put the hounds on my trail. Now, any questions? No, not from us chickens. No, I take that back. Us chickens do have a question. What good did it do to try to hide your identity and obscure your trail? But that guy gives the sheriff a detailed description of you. David's face lit up with a sneaky grin. Ah, but he won't. Or perhaps I should say that what he will tell them, they will find rather incredible. You see, he'll remember something about a bright flying object stopping their vehicle, and there'll be a gap of several hours that he won't be able to recall. And if they should try hypnosis, that's when it will get real interesting. I have to admit to you, Stan, I would love, as the saying goes, to be a fly on the wall at that session. I guess that guile does have its uses after all. Well now, it looks like we're coming to your stop soon. I guess I should tell you that the serial killer, whose name was Carl Whitaker, a.k.a. the Torturer, was discovered by the Sheriff's Department during a morning raid that they made on the old Grand warehouse. The Sheriff's Department reported that they found 11 of the killer's victims inside the abandoned warehouse. It is thought that Whitaker killed as many as 18 people, including his female assistant, Monica Johnson, whose body was also found in the abandoned warehouse. The Sheriff's Department would also like to speak to the individual that called from a nearby payphone, tipping them off to the killer's location. This individual told the Sheriff's Office that he had accidentally killed the Johnson woman when she attacked him with a knife. The Sheriff's Office reports that Whitaker claims that he killed his assistant, but could get no reason for doing so. Interestingly, Whitaker claimed that he did not know how he had become trussed up with over a dozen zip ties, and all that he does remember is that he and his assistant were driving down State Road 24 when what appeared to be some kind of aircraft flew up and they were blinded by a bright light. He recalled that the craft landed nearby, but after that, he didn't remember anything else until the sheriff's department discovered him trussed up on a blood-soaked cot in the abandoned warehouse. The sheriff's department spokeswoman stated they dismissed Whitaker's story as a ploy to cop an insanity plea. I like this story. It is interesting that he never told you why the killer's nickname was the Torturer. You see, he killed all his victims with a drill, bit by bit. It said that he is so good at his chosen field that he taught a college course on it. You should have heard his Hannibal lecture. It is said that he never bored anyone in his audience. Now, it's poetry time. Hopefully, I won't bore you either. Carl Whitaker was a bit dismayed, could not believe he'd been betrayed, swore an oath on that fateful day, they'd have revenge on that alien gray. His mother told him he shouldn't swear, advice he spurned for he didn't care. He wasn't afraid to swing in the air, but he forgot that state used the electric chair. A lesson to be learned, so listen well, so you don't end up in a dreary cell. I'm advising you, like I advised my brother, take the straight and narrow, and listen to Mother. Thanks again for taking this little journey with me. It really makes the pain so much better when it's shared. So please share this channel with at least one friend, and at least 5 or 6 enemies, because you know nobody deserves it more. Also, please depress the like button, and hopefully it won't be too depressing. And while you're at it, take a moment to scratch out a comment telling me how much you love, or hate, The Strange Express. The story was a bit long this time, so I better wrap it up before the conductor grabs me by both ears and throws me off the train like he did last time. Bye for now. See you again soon. And don't forget, happy rails to you.